Mystical Musings Podcast.
Welcome to another episode of the Mystical Musings Podcast. And I'm your co-host, Brenton.
Hi, everybody. Rachelle here. Happy to be with you.
Yeah. And for those of you who are maybe new to us or just joining us for the first time, this podcast started as really just a series of conversations between Rachelle and I. We work together. We both do a lot of work in the spiritual and mental health field. And we just kept telling each other, we should start recording these.
Yeah, it's great. I'm glad we finally did, because we would sit and have conversations for, hour or two, and it just like so much would come up and develop. And for me in particular, there was a lot of richness and a lot of growth and just wanting to share what kind of naturally emerges between the two of us. And hopefully y'all find it valuable.
Yeah. And it's kind of cool. I mean, you've got Taurus and Scorpio axis energy going. You've got manifestor and manifesting generator energy going. So yeah, lots of depth and light at the same time. Mm-hmm. But what we try to bring you is basically conversations that are both relevant to what we're experiencing now, but also that are out of the box and on alternative paths to health and healing that hopefully helps you remember that everything that you need is inside of you.
Yeah, one thing that I want to say just in brief is sitting, and you probably have had this experience too, Brenton, but sitting in a room with somebody over the years and people from lots of different lifestyles and life experiences, there's trends that happen to lots of people at the same time. And that's sort of part of what is coming up. It's like, oh, there's trends that are happening in the community that people don't necessarily see. So this is another cool way to share that.
Yeah, very much. Very much. And I guess speaking of community, that's a good segue. Thanks for that.
Yeah.
What we really want to talk to you about today is community, spiritual community, and really the way we were kind of thinking about it is community as a spiritual practice, which I think sounds a little bit funny or a little bit interesting right now to think about community as a practice. Sometimes it actually feels more like a chore to me. But yeah, it feels like a relevant thing right now.
Yeah, absolutely. On so many levels. And I like the word practice because at least in the Western world, I would say not everybody. Some people have grown up in community, but a lot of people haven't. And we have this sort of support and this enthusiasm for individualism. Like, I can do it all. I can take it all on, right? And the practice comes when we step into community, and it feels uncomfortable because we're not familiar with it. We don't know how to engage fully. So it is a practice, and we'll talk a lot more about that today. I think of like what are the ways that we kind of have to sit with it, gestate within community in order for it to start giving back in the way that it purports to do.
Yeah, and it's ironic, right? Because community is something that's so deeply ingrained into the genetics of being human, let alone being alive on planet Earth. Because I think community is a very planetary kind of quality. But nowadays it's largely about remembering, because like you mentioned, our society it's become so individualized. And so I thought it might be beneficial just to maybe talk about what even is community, because like you mentioned, it is kind of this foreign thing today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let's do that. The first thing that comes to mind about what is community is it's really varied and can be stratified. And so I think in some regards, talking about community as a spiritual practice is kind of leaning towards the highest end of community, but there's entry-level community as well, right?
True. Yeah, we don't have to reach for enlightened spiritual community in the first step.
Right. Yeah, it's good to get our feet wet where it feels comfortable. I'm curious. Well, I guess I'll just say this: we, as humans, we're social beings. Biologically, we need each other to rely upon each other, even though we've been given this message that we don't need anything. But if we look through history, that is actually true. We need that community support. And I like the reflection around the earth and the biosphere, and of course in transpersonal psychology and spiritual worlds, that comes in too. And you start to look around, and it's pretty, I think, readily apparent that we are connected in lots of different ways.
Yeah, and it is so funny because I think this planet very much it understands interconnectedness. It understands the balance of giving and receiving and sharing. And even if it seems kind of extreme but close at times, because nature can be pretty freaking scary, there's this overarching sense of connected balance to the whole system. And I think that that's some of what I see as there in community, whether my experience of community is, just it's a group of people getting together that are of like mind, right? Or if I'm looking at that more broad kind of non-physical perspective, like you mentioned, in the fact that I'm swimming in a community of bacteria and elements and non-physical beings, right? So we can look at community in a lot of different places.
Yeah, and interesting, I hadn't thought of this, but we as a single human being, a single biological entity, are a community of different cells and organisms and bacteria and all of that. And so that and why are we even bringing this up? Like, one could ask, like, who cares that we are a community? Well, it's helpful to look and see, like, this is reflected, at least from my perspective, it's reflected at every layer of existence. And so that tells me that there must be something to it. There must be some value to it of, taking a deeper look into how this can benefit us and why in our own bodies and why in nature and why in spirituality is this something that is such a big topic and a common trend.
Yeah, and again, it seems like such this kind of basic part of being a human that we all should, or kind of inherently know about, but many of us don't. Right. And I think part of what you're describing that I hear is there's mystical magic in the kind of mundane parts of community, like really just contemplating the fact that my digestive tract is a entire biome in and of itself of community that keeps me alive even beneath my radar. Like, that's magic. That's truly magic to think about. But when we're not present with things like that, it's easy to not only take them for granted, but to just zoom over them and assume we understand it and then miss it constantly.
Yeah, I'm struck by just you mentioning that, and like, what are some examples of ways that community shows up in kind of an everyday way, maybe that we don't look at, and maybe some are like, oh yeah, there's a community there, right? I think about parents as a community, and kind of local educational, like a school or something, then there's a community there. A family can be a community.
A friend group. In some cases, I very much feel this at CSC, a workplace, especially when there's a common mission, is very much a community endeavor. Yeah,
we can only hope to feel community at work. That's one of the things where I think a lot of times that doesn't feel that way.
I would say places of learning. So whether it's like you mentioned, a school, but I'm thinking also like from a church to an ashram to a yoga studio, a meditation studio, right? All of those are the places for community.
Yeah, I was thinking about yoga too. People, go to a yoga class, and there's kind of a temporary, maybe longer, but a temporary kind of community built. And what is that feeling like when you're actually engaging in a yoga practice with other people? There's maybe a common breath that happens periodically, or there's a group mind think. That's a whole other piece of a very, more subtle layer of community. And even like a band can be a community, right? Ways that we actually move in and out of different communities throughout our life, and throughout our days even.
Yeah. And what you described too is that there's different types of community, and there's really no wrong way to practice community. But I think that some of what maybe we're trying to bring awareness to is the opportunity that lies in community when we are conscious with it, where we're mindful, where we're intentional with it, because that's where the healing power of community really starts to express itself. I'm a fan of etymology, and I was looking at the word community. 700-year-old roots, turns out.
Wow.
But some of the oldest roots relate to words that mean shared or free or belonging to all. And it's that last one, belonging to all, that I think is part of what I hear you saying, because when I'm alone, it's much easier for me to just kind of check out with the fact that I'm breathing the same air that every human has ever breathed in existence. But if I'm sharing space with somebody, then all of a sudden it's much more easy for me to realize, oh, I'm sharing actual air with somebody. I'm sharing energy here.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And that's really powerful to carry that with us. And kind of going back to the common everyday things, like neighborhood associations can be a community. Gardening can be a way to bring community. And it's just like, what is that feeling when we have that realization of like, oh, we have shared air, or we have shared food, or we have shared social connection, sitting around the fire? That's probably older than 700 years. And while, the etymology of the word is that old, the actual practice of it is probably thousands of years old, right? Coming around a heat and light source. That's pretty powerful stuff. Pretty anchored into our DNA.
Yeah, the anchoring point. Gosh, there's so much I want to say. Quick note, I think there's evidence that humans have been gathering around the fire for 1 million years.
Wow.
So yeah, crazy. But it just goes to show, right? That's how deeply steeped in gathering and communal support humans are. And nowadays you would never believe that, because we're isolated in our endeavors, we're isolated in our goals, we're isolated in our success, and then when we get home, we're isolated in our relaxation because of our phones, right? So we really have to remember and relearn some of these things, but it's challenging to overcome that inertia of individualism. It's like I'm resistant to it.
Right? Yeah, totally. I mean, yes, I want to go there, but I want to say this one piece first, which is like, in some ways, there's unconscious communities that we don't take note of, which is like, we go to a grocery store to buy our foods, most of us. There's a whole community, a whole system of like grocers, people who tend to the food in the grocery store and sell it. And then there's distributors who bring the food to the grocery store. And then there's the farmers who bring, who create the food. That's all community. It's just that we don't see it like that, and that's at all levels of our existence, really. And so bringing our mind into those pieces of awareness is really helpful. And we'll go into even more esoteric connections to that, of like, oh yeah, I'm eating this orange and it's connected to sunshine. Wow. Okay, cool.
Yeah, I remember the first time I experienced something like that was with the raisin mindfulness experience. To really think about how many people have been a part of just getting this tiny little mindless morsel of snack in my hand is incredible. It's truly incredible. And I know that we've talked about this a lot, but the bigger our society gets and the more we become consumed with that fire of expansion and greed, it's like capitalism starts to take over and that distance starts to increase. And that's what I hear you saying. There's a distance between the food, between us and our food even, but then between us and who grows our food, who brought our food to us, who prepared our food, right? All of these breakdowns in the community system. Yeah, there's a conscious disconnection. And so while it's an unconscious community, we're not actually benefiting from it in the fullest way. Even though it still exists, it's operating on some level of community, right? But we're not seeing it, we're not engaging, we're not making heart connections with any of these threads. And so we don't have as much benefit from that. The heart.
Yeah.
Makes me wonder, can there really be community without heart? Does it just become a group of people united in desire? And does that even really make for community?
Yeah, I think when I sit in circle, I often think about, I could use either metaphor, but I would say a heart at the center of the circle with a pulsation. I could also use the sun as, at the center where there's a radiating light that touches everybody. Yeah, and I like working with that. Even if it feels like disjointed and confusing and scary and like, I don't know these people and what's going to be revealed to me. These are a lot of the fears that come up when we really start to consciously check into community. If I bring that into my awareness of that, there's actually a center point in community, and I tune into that center point and I start to feed it just in my mind, just energetically, then there tends to be more of a rhythm. There tends to be more of an opening.
Yeah, it's the difference between a circle and a triangle. And that's what I hear you describing. It's like that radiant kind of model. That really is community. It's a willingness to connect in this place that's not better or less than. And I think so often we're told today that to be in a group means there's a hierarchy, right? There's a person who's an expert, who's better than, who has more that I need, and it puts us in this kind of imbalance of seeking more outside of ourselves. And it's, there's kind of this irony there, because I mentioned it, I think, at the beginning of this episode, that part of what we want to do at Creative Spirit is to remind you that you don't need to strive for something outside of yourself or balance. At the same point, right, we do need things outside of ourselves too. So it's not like there's this kind of blanket statement there. We need food, we need air, we need water, we need people. Yeah.
It's interesting. I'm going to go way far out, so hopefully you can all track with me here, but I don't see community as outside of ourselves. We talked about community being in our own body, and it feels like there's this wellspring, I don't know, this torus, kind of phenomena where it's like it goes out and comes back in and goes out and comes back in and goes out and comes back in. And I think this idea that community is not a part of us is where there is some of the challenge, right? And it's so easy to get into that mindset. I have it myself, and I can see the benefit of this, but I'm like, I think maybe it's helpful to talk about the fears and the obstacles that come up, because I've seen this in myself. I've seen it in my community, and it's okay to say, like, sometimes you need to step back and give yourself some space from community. But fatigue is one that comes up almost universally. I don't have the time and space and energy to be a part of community. And what that statement says to me, and what it's a reflection of, is that we actually haven't been in community long enough to see that the energy will come back. It does recycle. There are moments when if we're in a healthy enough and large enough community, when we have generative energy and we're giving it out, somebody else is receiving it. And then when we need to step back, somebody else has the generative energy and we're receiving it. And that takes time, that takes development, it takes patience, it takes learning how to be a part of community that is healthy. That's a process.
It very much is. And what comes to my mind too is that community really, it gives us that opportunity to not have to do it all or be it all. And I think, there's holy texts that talk about, I think the Gita is what comes to mind, where Krishna basically says, it's better to spend, or no, I'm getting my verses confused. Krishna tells Arjuna something to the effect of, like, you're here to be a warrior, so stop trying to be all these different things. Like, be who you are to be. And when we live these separate, kind of isolated individual lives, we feel like we have to be a lot of things that may not be really true to who we are, because there's so many hats to fill in physical existence. But you're right, when we when we tap into the balance and the shared kind of giving, receiving of community, my experience has been that there's actually less that I have to give and more that I receive. However, you're right. It takes work to get to that point. It takes work inside. It takes work communicating and being vulnerable and authentic and asking questions and listening, right? And all of these things that come with community.
Yeah. You bring up another important point, which is another fear that I think comes up often for people is, am I going to have to be vulnerable? And will people see the hidden parts of myself that I don't want them to see? And that is a direct result of growing up in an individualistic society that tells you there are parts that you have to hide. Nobody else has them. And we should feel shame around them or feel fear around them and tend to them personally, which is where this like individual therapy comes up, right? And in community, we start to learn, oh, I have that part of me too. I have violence in me too. I have fear in me too. I have depression in me too. I have joy in me too. And we can start to see that, again, there's all parts of us here. And that, well, again, in a strong, healthy community, vulnerability starts to feel connecting rather than uncomfortable and draining.
It's almost like a metaphor within this bigger metaphor of community, that the more authentic I am, the more energy I have, because I'm not sustaining so much energy toward maintaining personality and ego and these ways I think I need to be to fit in and connect. Which is why, in the beginning I asked, like, is it real community if we can't really show up as ourselves?
Mm-hmm.
Or it might be community, it might not be healing or a spiritual practice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. And you bring up, you keep bringing up these pieces around like our authentic selves. And in smaller communities, it may be hard to fill out the whole in terms of authentic selves. But I think if we were in these multiple rings of community, the largest of which would be, we'll call it society for right now. We know that it goes beyond that into the environment and beyond that into spirit. But then all the roles, so to speak, or all the identities, they take up an important place in community, right? Whereas from this individual perspective, like you were saying, it's like, I felt this, trying to run the business of CSC. It's like, I have to wear all these different hats and do all this stuff. And I just like, exhaust myself. And it's like, oh, I have certain strengths and I have a certain direction. And in community, there are other people that bring other strengths and they can teach me and I can teach them. We can benefit from each other. And and that also makes me think about parts work, right? Mm-hmm. There's so much about parts work, internal family systems. And this is another piece about community, is that the community can start to reflect different parts of ourselves and we can see that and we can start to work with it. And I think there's some really great value in healing and well-being in that too. Kind of going back to what I was saying a little bit before, one of the things that I think individualism brings in is this us versus them sort of piece. And that's where a lot of violence and isolation and all these things start, and ostracization and lack of understanding. And when we're in community, there is kind of a requirement of like, we got to work our shit out, And I think there's some pieces that when we're in community, this is part of the fear that comes up. We have to start to entertain our whole humanity, right? We can't, I think a lot of times, like in an individualist society, here we are, and it's like, I can look out there and point at that person and say, you're violent, and the spiritual practices talk about this all the time. And it's like, I have the seeds of violence inside of me. I have to acknowledge that. Or, I look it out and I'm like, oh, that person is so greedy. And in community, in close community, I can see again, the rhythm, the flow of like give and take. And I can see those seeds of greed in me, or whatever it is. I can see those seeds of generosity in me as well. And so community is a better reflection for what I call our whole humanity, right? It's like it's harder to kind of like put things in the basement, so to speak, or lock them away or disidentify with them when we're in community. You know, it's like, oh, there's things that we really have to look at. And while that may be scary and uncomfortable and take energy at first, overall, we are just more whole beings. I don't know any other way to say it.
Yeah, I feel that very much. And, you know, I think the internet and social media tend to propagate that kind of distance because they keep us out of our hearts. It's easier to stay in my head and in my brow and kind of be untethered. But when I share space with somebody, it's much harder to be out of my heart. It's harder to be ungrounded because I'm actually sharing space. And so you're right. Like, I can look at large groups of people and just hurl a bunch of insults and decry all the reasons that we're separate. But as soon as I share space with somebody, it's harder to deny that there's a human in front of me, that we're breathing the same air, that, you know, this person likely has experiences that I could stand to receive and learn from. Right? And all of that changes if I'm willing to be with somebody. And I think that that's one of those factors that maybe keeps us from community, is it forces us to be present. It forces us to be present with our own limitations, our own self-judgments, our own kind of walls and barriers, you know, that inevitably come up and are triggered by people, because that's what people do. They reflect. Yeah.
Yeah, you really hit an important point there, you know, a sweet spot, so to speak, of like when we're in presence with somebody, it's harder to identify them as a label or an object or a, you know, something that is outside of us. If we're present for somebody's humanity and their suffering and their joy, it's just, there's more opening, and it's harder to separate them out. Politics, maybe they're still relevant, but they become less relevant when we're like, oh, this person, right? Everybody needs love. Nobody wants to suffer. Everybody has fear. Those are pretty universal things. And when we come into community, those are the things that we start to recognize and tap into and see, like, oh, this person that is 100% different than me. Well, I don't agree with their ideology, right? But I don't want somebody to suffer, you know? And so, yeah, coming from the head versus into the heart, that's a really important piece with community for sure.
Yeah. And I mean, every spiritual master that I can think of that I've studied from any world faith has basically said the same thing. And it's that what we do to others, we do to ourselves. That what you do to the least, you know, of these, you do to the most and the highest. And so, and I think there's that kind of, you know, even the way that we look at these kind of Eastern terms in a westernized way, we look at karma as something that's kind of outside of us. And if I do something bad now, then in the future something else is going to bad and happen to me. And that's not how it works. It's that you leave a piece of your soul behind, or you break a chip of your heart away every time that you choose to do something that separates you. And it's like, that shit is what starts to add up, so that, you know, 10 years from now, there's 5,000 pieces of your soul laying in waste, you know, along your path and your choices. And then you get to this point and something bad happens and you say, why? And it's not this one thing. It's because community is this earth, this patient, this long-term kind of unfolding. And it requires responsibility. That's the other thing that I heard you say. It requires the responsibility to show up, to respond to my own shit, so that I'm not triggered by other people's stuff when it inevitably comes up too, because they're also humans, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I love that piece, that it's like when you act discordant from your heart in community, you're going to feel that more. And that's part of the reason why there's so much fear around community, because we didn't learn how to work with that, you know? And it can be really scary, but on the flip side, it can be incredibly powerful to start to open that up and work with it and receive the benefits of that. I want to kind of take a side detour and come back just to talk about, from a psychological perspective, there is probably multiple theories, but there's kind of this theory of group development. And one of the things that I think gets in the way is when we come together as a group, as a new group, some of the pieces that come up are that the stages are forming and storming and norming and performing and adjourning if the group moves on. And this forming stage is like kind of, awkward, right? It's like when you go into a group or a party or something like that, and there's icebreakers, and you're like, I don't know who this person is. And that can last a relatively, extended period of time. It's not just like an hour, right? It can be 6 months, depending on how often the group is meeting, how open people are, how deep they're diving, right? And then we go into the storming stage, which is like you're throwing rotten tomatoes at people because all of your shadow starts to come out, right? I've had direct experience with this. It's tough, and it's like, why are you doing it that way? That's terrible. And it's like, oh, I have to look at myself. And that's, again, it can be challenging. And if we're looking long term, a lot of times people will check out of community in those first two stages, which can go, I don't know, it depends on the group, but they can go a year or more even. And people say, okay, well, that's it. That's what group is. It's this awkward, shadowy, difficult thing. And it's like, okay, well, if you're with a group, a community some of us don't even have the opportunity. Some people have been in community for multiple generations. I can't even imagine what the cohesion of that feels like. As a settler, a descendant of settler colonizers, it's not something that I just don't have in my experience, right? But it's like, we get past the forming awkward, we get past the storming, we're working with our own shadows, we're seeing all of our parts reflected in the group. Then we get to norming, which is like, okay, things are smoothing out, we're coming to some agreements, but it's also still not like awesome, it's good, and we're starting to get some mutual benefits. And then we get to performing, which is where really starts to set in. And for groups that have been together for a long period of time and they're doing deep work together, that's where we really start to get the big magic. And I say that not to discourage people, but to, there's lots of quick, this goes along with individualism too, of like quick solutions. Let's get it done. And I think when we're looking at the evolution of humanity and of Earth and of community, it takes time. And we have to be patient with the evolution.
Gosh. Among the myriad truth that you just laid on us, what really stands out for me is what you mentioned at the very end, that, in a time of quick fixes and short attention spans, what we're describing is a long unfolding in many ways. And it's not to say that we have to stick with a singular community our entire lives. I think some people become trapped by the family community because they feel a sense of obligation. But beyond all of that, we grow like trees. And so I think it's unfair for us to expect ourselves, especially if we don't have a lot of experience with community, but even if we do, to just walk into new groups and expect to be liked, to be connected, to be at ease, to be vulnerable and authentic. It's like the less practice we have with all of those, it's like it's exponentially more challenging to just show up that way. And speaking from somebody who's had extensive practice doing all of those in public and group settings, it's still so challenging for me to do at times. So I think one of my kind of superpowers for kind of moving into new groups and moving into community in a vulnerable way is to just lay out my vulnerability and security right out of the gate. I love walking into groups and saying, hey, I'm Brenton. My palms are sweaty and my armpits are sweaty because I'm really uncomfortable and kind of insecure right now, but I'm grateful for your patience because I don't really like being in groups and talking to new people. Like something like that is so disarming. And whenever I hear people say that, it's like, oh my God, my heart opens and I want to just talk to them immediately. And that's not the reason I do it. I do it because I'm honestly all of those things. But sometimes I think that those kinds of practices help us just get out of the seriousness of this stuff because we make this all so serious. But all it is talking and connecting with other human beings.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. Just opening with a certain level of vulnerability, a certain level of authenticity, and to even walk into a group and be able to say like, hey, I haven't learned this. I haven't done this. My family didn't teach me this. My community hasn't taught me this. I don't know how to communicate in group. I don't know how to like make connections with people in group, and to be able to say that if it's a good, solid community, you can bet people will reach out to you and be like, hey, come. That's the thing about community is, it tends to not push away. It tends to include and draw in, if we're open to it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, since we're along those lines, I mean, is there anything else you want to talk about just along the lines of just some of the benefits? We've talked about some of the challenges that come with maybe moving into and even sustaining community, which is maybe something that we haven't fully touched on that is worth mentioning, just that sometimes it's okay and it's important to leave the community that you're in if you're not experiencing maybe some of the things that we've been describing. Right. Because somebody that you and I both used to work with once mentioned that sometimes spiritual community is like a flock of birds that gather on a tree, and then all of a sudden something happens and woof, it's gone. And I think that there's profundity in the in working with non-attachment. I mean, this is like a really deep way to work with community, right? But I'm sharing it so that we remember that nothing has to stay the same, especially if it stops filling our heart and bringing us toward who we want to be.
Yeah, I love that. I think it's really important to be in flow with the organic unfoldment. And I think not only do we not have to be in a single community and it just isn't reflected anywhere in nature that anything is part of a single community, but that's the final stage of group development is adjourning, leaving the group. And there's a lot of, one of the things that I loved about Ram Dass, a teacher, would say like the practice serves you until it doesn't serve you anymore, right? The community that you're a part of serves you until it doesn't serve you anymore. And that doesn't mean that it was failed. It could mean that, but it could also mean that your evolution is ready for some other type of connection. And so it is a very much a living, breathing, alive, dynamic, changing thing, just like everything else in life. Yeah.
I mean, I know we've talked about this a bunch, but that's one of the reasons I love looking to nature as examples for community, because oceans and forests, those are spectacular examples of community that are dynamic and constantly changing. I mean, seasonally and, by the decade and all of that. And there's so much that we can really just learn about unburdening ourselves when it comes to community interaction. And one of my favorite examples that I share often is that when I walk through a forest, it's not like the forest hires cleaners that come through and arrange all the paths before I get there because they want it to look nice, right? It's like I show up and the forest is as messy as it always is, and I wouldn't have it any other way because the leaves on the ground are beautiful and the broken tree limbs give the character and the kind of just uniqueness to the trees. And it's like, can you imagine just a manicured forest everywhere you went if trees were all evenly spaced, all the same color, the same grass? It's like, I mean,
yeah, we do. We have that.
They're called subdivisions. Yeah.
Yeah, and monocrops, and they don't thrive. The ecosystems don't thrive.
Exactly.
There's one teacher that I worked with many years ago that was really working with chaos theory and how actually our human psyche needs some level of chaos. This is why, and there's some visual data research around this too, of like we're drawn to the the edge of kind of an open space, but where we can kind of peer into the forest. So we have this both. We need both. We need kind of order and rhythm and organization, and we also need chaos, and we need things to end. We need, gnarliness of trees and irregular thing, just like looking at a square space or a perfectly circular space. There's research being done on how this impacts our psyche, and we need this, like all the different colors. If you're looking out, into the forest, there's different colors and shapes and textures and sizes and movement and all of that, and we need that for our well-being. So it just made me think of kind of a different type of chaos theory where we're drawn into that.
Yeah, and it's just like, with these stages of group development, we can't be informing perpetually. We can't be instorming perpetually. We can't be adjourning perpetually, but we need all of them, in these different ways. I mean, it's easier for me to say I'm a 3-line in human design, so give me all the change and variety. But I mean, I really do think that that's just part of being a human.
Yeah, and I think when we bring our ideas into humanity, we get really closed down about like, this person should be behaving this way. Why aren't you doing this? It should look like this, and that's one of the things. It's like being more open to change and the unknown and impermanence when we're coming into group and things not always working well. There's an unfoldment of life, right? Probably the highest, most enlightened being on the planet. I don't know who that would be. We could maybe surmise, but are they in constant performance? Are they in constant perfection? No, they experience growth, development, plateau, demise, decay, end, and back again. But when we get into human ideology, because the ego structure gets into play, then we get kind of contracted and like, it's got to be this way. But actually, for full growth and development, we need all of these different forms and ways of being.
That you bring up a really good point, and I think it's why it's important to practice and experience community outside of just people, because I think sometimes we can get kind of caught into just the stuff that comes with egos and humanness, especially with all of the divisiveness right now just in the airwaves. And so when we kind of get out of human community and we start looking at community in these different and perhaps even more non-physical ways, then I think it's easier to maybe move more into that heart space or move into more of an expansive kind of interconnected state of being where I am more open to seeing the ways that my choices impact other beings and vice versa, or the ways that I can kind of distribute the weight of the burdens of being alive in the physical world among community, and I don't have to carry them all on my individual shoulders. So maybe you want to talk about just a little bit of some of the esoteric side of community?
Yeah, well, let's start with environment, and I'll just say that there's a practice actually that we have that's called ecosystems of support, where it really starts to talk about this, but you can go and look at different ecosystems. And I love this idea of getting outside of the human ego and kind of studying like, how does this one thing that's in seeming opposition to this other thing within the ecosystem, how do they coexist? And I think that that's really valuable to look at. And the ecosystems of support is looking at like, how are the different parts of our physical environment, the landscape, the animals, the insects, the bacteria, the fungi, sun, rain, all of it. How does that support us? What are the characteristics of each of those different natural beings that support us? How am I part of that ecosystem? So that's another way to get fatigued with human community, or if you want a broader perspective, you're working with something difficult, that's a really cool way to reflect on that. I'm wondering if you have more about the environment, and then we can even go bigger than that in terms of community.
I don't think so, not more than what I've already shared, just about the reflection opportunity that comes with being immersed in communities in the natural world, like non-human communities, the communities between birds and squirrels and trees, or between fungal networks and roots that turn out to be an entire forest. It's like, I mean, turn on Planet Earth, or a nature documentary, but hold in mind, I am watching something about community. I'm watching a documentary about community and see what kind of pops out.
Yeah, that's cool. And I'll just kind of cycle back to you. You do a lot of work on elements, and there's another kind of community, a really basic roots community, right? And you're working with that all the time. It's an environmental, natural part of the landscape community.
Which can, just speaking of elements, we can take that environmental kind of elemental configuration and mirror it in the body and look at the ways that, there's an elemental community inside of my mind, inside of my consciousness and my emotions in my body as well, that can be balanced and maintained if there's this kind of authentic giving and receiving. But it can become imbalanced just like normal community can too. So yeah, very much so.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, so we were talking about this earlier before we started this talk. Back when I was doing my master's thesis, I was talking about these concentric rings, and you can look at it different ways, but let's just say at the center is the human community, because that's the way humans look at it. I would have it reversed maybe, but we'll say that humanity is at the center, and then that is seated inside the environmental community, right? We're all part of the biosphere. Sometimes people will refer to it as the web of Gaia, or net of Indra is another way. That's a spiritual community. And there's lots of different little, different types of community within that. And then we go into the environment, and then we go into the transpersonal or the spiritual or the cosmic even, right? We can talk about, stars and planets and all of that too. So on that spirit level, maybe you want to share a few things about that?
Yeah, I know you and I are both steeped in this work, but I think that there's a profound sense of comfort that comes with knowing that I'm never alone if I can attune myself to what's beyond the physical. And that's true for, whether we're talking about elements and elemental guardians or beings, or like the spirit of a river or of a large tree or a forest itself. Those are beings that I have communed with that have brought me deep comfort. But also, I know we've talked about this too, the recent episode from the Emerald, from Joshua Shray, talks about burdens. And I think the more that I've built relationship through spiritual practice, through devotionary practice with some of these non-physical beings, deities, guardians, it's helped me to also build this sense of both safety and a sense of levity, because I don't have to carry so much. And I think this is why there's so much power in prayer, because there's being a human is heavy, and we've collectively and historically sought ways to find levity amongst life's challenges, and we've often done that through spirituality. But in the West these days, much of the spirit in spirituality has been removed, and so we're left with these kind of practices that don't have a lot of oomph behind them or meaning behind them, and we're wondering why we're kind of overwhelmed and without community.
Yeah, I could say a lot about that. One of the things that I want to sort of take it out of is kind of more religious community, that we can find great value in that is part of spirit, and depends on where you go and how you approach it. But one of the things that I think is kind of cool, and there's been different people working with this. Jung is a notable person that worked with this many years ago, which is looking at archetypes. It's just these constellation of characteristics, right? So if the word deity or the god or whatever it is doesn't work for you, you can look and see certain kind of energetic patterns or emotional patterns or characteristics that you can speak to. One would be like then it goes back further, like into the Vedas, right? Which is like the gods were the clouds, or the gods were the storms, or the gods were the sun, right? And so there's lots of different ways to work with this. It doesn't have to be a religious order or a religious iconography or language. And I just wanted to note that, so that it doesn't have to be exclusive to anyone. However you work with it. There's even scientific ways that have been looked at, like, what is this called? Rupert Sheldrake, and I think they're called morphogenetic fields or something like that, which is like, whoa, that's super, super sciencey sort of thing. But yeah, just wanted to mention these kind of constellations of ideas and energies and characteristics that we can draw from as well as part of the spiritual community. And then there's the ancestral realm as well, and not just human ancestral. That's part of it. And some of it is, there's some important work to be done there. There's a lot of healing to do in the ancestral realm, but there's also ancestry of the earth and ancestry of the stars. There's, the actuality of the stars now, and ancestry and the planets and the cosmos. And it's just like, wow, there's so much that we can be a part of, and we can draw upon that when our mind or our heart has different needs. And we just kind of scan all of these different communities and see, like, what is a fit for me right now? Where will I be buoyed? Well, where will I be supported by that?
Yeah, it makes sense why there's so many cultures that have deduced that the purpose of life is to be in awe and worship of the planet. I mean, I'm thinking about, just people that had this enlightened perspective, and Carl Sagan comes to mind as you're speaking. Just the realization that we're made of the same stuff as stars. That's a profound community connection in and of itself right there. But I appreciate you mentioning more of the secular route. Sam Harris is somebody that comes to mind, who's a more modern spiritual teacher who was, trained in mystic Buddhism, but he's an atheist. And so one of his perspectives is that part of what connects us is consciousness. And that's something that we haven't fully talked about, but really underlies a lot of the esoteric side of community, which is we are connected by the energy of life itself. And that by merely being alive, we share this miracle that exists very few places in the universe that we know of. The entire fucking universe, it's like life is largely pretty isolated, if we look at it from a physical way, right? But the more that we kind of open, which goes back to the very beginning, you mentioned that community is not this outside thing. It's always this like presence, deeply integrated experience. Then all of a sudden, it goes back to that satya work, that truth work, like, oh, I really am never alone. I really am never alone. It's just, maybe a question of how willing am I to be connected in ways that are more physically manifested or not.
Yeah, I think of the microcosm and the macrocosm and how they reflect each other, right? And and we can take that at many different levels. We can take it at many different levels. I think I'll leave it at that. Otherwise, we would go on for many more hours. I want to kind of cycle back to this piece around, like, what I want to be really kind of concrete about naming what's the point? What's the benefit? Why are we even really advocating this? Because we've talked about the challenges, right? And so it's like, what do we get out of it? What do I get out of it?
Yeah. What comes to my mind right now, and I know we have other things to kind of mention about this, but I think what I see that's alarmingly beneficial right now is honesty. We get honesty out of community. And I think part of that is that it forces us to ask ourselves and to get honest about what really replenishes us, what really inspires us, what lights us up. And I'm a very, kind of alone person. I like my quiet, I like space, I like mountaintop energy. Yeah. However, if I don't have community connection, I start to just kind of like break down and just get in these weird loops in myself and whatnot, And so it's like, when I am with community, I get the reflection of, both the things that I'm insecure about that people help me see that it's not that big a deal, but also I'm reflected of the light that's inside of me, of who I can be. And it's like there's this kind of uplifting and pulling me out of myself that happens in community that I don't get if I'm by myself, period.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. I think there are parts of our evolution that we can't get in isolation. And there's aspects on both sides, the shadow aspect and the light aspect, that if we aren't acknowledging or conscious of those pieces in community, we just won't evolve in those ways. And that's, super valuable. I know. Yeah. I want to name a few of the pieces. I think we've been talking about it all along, but just to make it really concrete, a big piece around community, and this is pretty well known, is the potential for support, right? Support emotionally, support physically, support spiritually. I think that there's this idea of, or this potential for like shared tenderness, shared empathy, shared compassion, gratitude, I think can often emerge. A feeling seen and heard, and seeing and hearing too is also really valuable. There's maybe not enough to be said about what it's like to actually see and hear another being, that's a giving that we benefit from, and we can't do that if we're not in community.
And I think that some people really are, what they benefit most from in especially conscious community is space, the opportunity to hold space and to be received with space, because so many of us especially grew up in places where there wasn't a lot of space, there wasn't a lot of mindfulness, there wasn't a lot of listening in particular. And so to be heard and to be seen as myself, sometimes that's really challenging to get with family or with close relationships, people that you've known a long time. And so new community in particular, you get to show up and be whoever you want, and maybe be yourself for the first time in ways that the inertia of your previous communities have not really given you the freedom to do.
Yeah, I love that. It's like this opportunity to unwind parts of ourselves that maybe our limited community of family suppressed, for example. And we get to start to open those and feel into those and extend ourselves a little bit more. And one of the things that I always talk about, and this is true as working as a therapist in just an environmental community with another human client, but it's also really true in like group work, is that there's so much shared wisdom. Even if we haven't been taught a lot of these things, when we drop into our heart as a community, that's dropping into spirit, that's dropping into source, that's dropping into, the history of the planet and the sun and all of that. And that starts to come out. And that is so magical. It's just, I think people even surprise themselves. And there's a kindling, right? The evolution of the group happens at a different rate than it does in isolation, because we're exposed to the light source of other beings. We're exposed to the ideas of other beings. So there's this exponential evolution that's possible.
Yeah. I mean, it's literally many hands make light work, and not just light as in levity, but like light as in bright work. Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah. I once learned that individuality is best fulfilled through unity. And it's kind of what we talked about earlier, but that if I'm not ever in community, then the gift that I have to offer may never activate. They may never come forth. And that's like, it really what we're talking about is greed. We're talking about hoarding, right?
Wow.
Which is like keeping it all for me.
Yeah, actually, I felt that recently, as I stepped more and more into community, I can see with more clarity around what my gifts are and have a space to offer, and again, to grow into that. Yeah, that's really potent. I'm really glad that you spoke that. Yeah, that's powerful.
Yeah, it's the difference between being sacred selfishness and like small selfishness.
Mm-hmm.
It was one of the ways I remember learning about it and practicing it in my school of metaphysics days.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's one of my favorite ways that I learned to be in community too. And this is another one of those like little secret superpowers for anybody that, struggles being in new groups or in community like that, is to serve, to look for a way to serve. One of my favorite things to do in potlucks, because potlucks used to be so uncomfortable and frustrating for me, just going around a bunch of people and just sitting there eating awkwardly in silence, but volunteering to do dishes and to help clean is like one of the greatest ways I learned to meet people, because you just have to sit, with your hands in hot water. You can't really go anywhere. You're like rubbing elbows and shoulders with somebody who's rinsing while you wash, and there's nothing to do but talk and be present with each other. And the larger the group that you're cooking and cleaning for, the more time you have for that kind of thing too. So the opportunity to give with other people sometimes takes the pressure off needing to figure out how to give and receive between myself and a group, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I would say that when being able to serve even just a little bit in group, like you're talking about, like washing dishes for a potluck, what's reflected back is gratitude and appreciation. It brings up this energy in yourself. Like the service is a gift, not to the community, not only to the community, but also to yourself. Right? You'll see your own light in other people's eyes when you serve in that way. And it really is pretty small effort, and that's super cool. And these are some of the magic pieces that happen, that the intangibles that even are hard to quantify sometimes, but that's a good one. I like that a lot.
Yeah, for sure. I guess something else I do want to mention just about being in community is that, especially for people that are maybe looking for community, whether they don't have any and they're looking to, move into community, or you're looking to deepen community that you already have, is to remember that just energy goes where attention flows. And so sometimes the best thing for me to do when I want to foster community is to turn off the news, to turn off social media, to turn off the energy and the airwaves that are trying to talk about how community is, not what we need, and how, the divisiveness and all of that. And sometimes just like turning that off is enough for me to remember some of those more subtle communities that we talk about. And it actually inspires me to connect with people, because I'm not filling my mind with the reasons and ways why people are different than me, or why I need to be separate from these people because they believe differently, or, whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good point. And it brings me back to this idea that it's all in flow, right? And there is a lot of divisiveness and a lot of separation in technology today. It doesn't always have to be like that, but because the society has kind of been built like that, technology reflects that, right? And here we're trying to use, and I think other people are doing it too, for sure, trying to use technology as a way of connecting, and just, being aware of when it's like a kind of turning off and turning away. Even though social media is supposed to be about connection, usually it's not. I don't know what the stats are. I think it's really high of when people go to social media and how bad they feel about themselves, or how disconnected they feel, right? And so that's an important thing to reflect on. And it's like, right, what is the way that I can give myself a moment of connection, whether that's with your pet or your environment or your family or your friends or a larger community that you're stepping into. And an easy way, we didn't touch on this yet, an easy way to make connections is to have a common interest, right? Maybe you want to connect with a group around music or spirituality or food or art or movement. Those are all really good places where community can start to feed you, and it doesn't have some of the intensity that like a really conscious group can have.
And for those that are ready for maybe more of that deeper intentional work, I do think that there are groups out there, I mean, I know because we facilitate them, that allow you to show up and not feel like you have to share or not feel like you have to perform. You know, it's like there's groups of people that allow you to just show up and be and listen and receive and not say anything at all and then leave, you know, and that's a perfectly okay thing to do too. Because I think that when we associate community with things like happy hour, it's like, okay, to be in community, I have to be this fun-loving extrovert, and that's not what community is, right? It's like trees don't go out and get hammered. That's not that energy. And so it's helpful to kind of rewire our brains about what to even expect in community too.
Yeah. And I'm glad you said that. That cycles back to this idea that there's a rhythm to community, and we have to really take some time to experience it to get to that point where we're seeing the rhythm. If there's an ebb and a flow, there's literally a giving and receiving that is reciprocal in all the beings at different times, right? So it's not always extroversion. It's not always like filleting yourself open. Vulnerability can really help, but sometimes it's helpful to just be in silence and receive and listen. You know, that's one of the ways. So all the roles in community are also valuable and welcome. Yeah,
I'm one of the reasons I'm a fan of group meditations, because it's a powerful way to be in community with not very many words, but to experience profound connection at the same time.
I love that. And there's that kindling again, where, you know, kind of supporting each other energetically, emotionally, psychically, intentionally. That's really valuable too. Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe in closing, we're talking about, you know, really the community that exists in the space between breaths and in between heartbeats and in between minds and hearts, right? That more subtle level. So we're talking about the Sangha, we're talking about the Ummah, the Coven, the prayer circle, right? All of these kind of ways that humans have been gathering in community that are maybe a little bit different than we typically associate. You know, just gathering in presence maybe is another way to see it. And just how needed that is still today, to just gather with the only intention being to share presence. That does not happen very often today.
Yeah. And just to take it back out into the environment, to, you know, the community of trees or the community ecosystem to be reflective of. And there's new ways of being in community that are emerging too, which is not, I went to this play last night, and it was a fundraiser for a couple of different communities that are suffering, right? And it's just this beautiful group of people coming together. So there's community in the people that put on the play, and in this play, the audience is part of it. And so there's then that community too, right? And it's like, and that was just something that was like, you know, temporary. It's just passing through. Yeah, I think we've lost touch with some of those really beautiful, sweet, just tender ways to connect and bring our hearts together, bring our spirits together, bring our presence, our breath, our awareness. And sometimes it's even just sitting together in silence, like you suggested, in meditation, song, dance, sunshine, snow. You know, there are these different experiences that kind of bind us together. These simple ways for us to come together in community.
Yeah, the simplicity part. I feel like that's kind of what's we're ready for, kind of collectively. And I think that one of those things that can happen too in community is bartering, which takes the pressure off of capitalism and the need to work and slave ourselves into these things that we don't want to do, that kill our soul. If we continue to cultivate communities in the ways that we're talking about today, then part of the exchange that happens is our physical needs in ways that don't involve the middleman with money and all of the things that governments and billionaires do with it.
Mm-hmm.
We free ourselves into just trading what we have to give and receiving what we need. And that happens emotionally, it happens mentally, spiritually, but it can happen physically too, which is the way that we used to have communities.
Yeah. Yeah. You bring up a really important point. We're kind of at a crazy inflection point in history where, you know, this idea of individualism is breaking down. I mean, you look at the cost of living, you look at you look at inflation and the cost of groceries, you look at, you know, just like the way the healthcare system is working, and the forces, or at least when I look at it, is like it's pushing us together. You see more and more families living together. You see more and more people, you know, multiple generations relying on each other for support now. And I think that's a really, I mean, I wish I could say, you know, I'm altruistic and like, oh, this is, in some ways, the reason we're having this conversation is because I'm seeing that movement, the need for that in our existence, right? Thich Nhat Hanh spoke before his death about Sangha, community, spiritual community, but community in general being the next Buddha. What does that mean in non-Buddhist terms? For me, what that means is that community is going to be the place where we evolve. Community is going to be the point of light. It's going to be the place where our heart opens. It's going to be the place where, we evolve and grow and get support. That's what that means to me. I don't know if you have any final thoughts about that.
I mean, it's so beautiful. Yeah, the time for the individual savior is past. It's time for the collective kind of recognition of our interconnected responsibility to save each other. And that's what we're reaching for, really, at the highest level. I mean, and we can figure it out planetarily, you know, we can go out from there, but we've got a lot of work to get to that point. Yeah. But I think it starts with conversations like this, you know?
Yeah. Beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I guess speaking of community, for anybody that is listening and is maybe seeking some new ideas or some new maybe ways to practice community, we have some opportunities. And while we do offer, you know, through Creative Spirit Collaborative workshops and retreats and things like that on the West Coast, we have a virtual community that we're building online. And we primarily are based in Patreon. And so on our free membership on Patreon, we have all kinds of opportunities for you to continue your own healing journey and practice. And in our collaborative tier, we actually have study groups that meet monthly for some of these topics that we've talked about. So I do think it's important that we mention that, because we really want to cultivate community with you wherever you are. And we want that to be a global thing. We want more and more people to be talking about these things, to be practicing and living these things, and to be forming communities of your own wherever you are. And so until then, we would love you to join our virtual community that we're building at patreon.com/c/creative spirit collaborative. It's a mouthful, but there are links, you know, wherever we are and wherever you're listening to this podcast, you'll be able to find us there.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, thanks to everybody who's listening, and we will catch you for the next episode of Mystical Musings.
Take care.